All right, it's time to start our Cities Digital webinar. Welcome, everyone. All right, well, welcome to this month's webinar provided to you by CDI. My name is Kyle Nebel, and I will be your host for today's training. And today we will be looking at how to make a Laserfiche report on itself, or in other words, use workflow to send you reports or report on itself. While we're in the session, you should have a ability to ask questions or send chat questions as well in the chat window. Go ahead and make sure that you post them in that box. We will take some time at the end of the webinar to go through and answer as many as possible. All right. And you can raise your hand for you if you want to just wave and say hi and grab my attention. You can do that. And I will check on the questions in chat as we go through here, but we will have some time certainly at the end of this webinar to take questions. It's not going to be certainly that long. All right, I will go not too fast, and therefore you can take screenshots and notes. Take a look at the content here, ask questions as we go along. And at the end of the session, we will be asking for a bit of a survey from the GoToWebinar as to how the webinar came across to you. We're always looking for recommendations for new topics as well. So if you have any comments or suggested topics, please provide that if you think that. And lastly, remember that this will be recorded and it will be accessible from our CDI YouTube channel within a few days. All right. Good stuff there. And today's topic is make Laserfiche report on itself, or in other words, use workflow to send you reports. And the intended audience for this is Laserfiche power users and or Laserfiche administrators. If you have the ability to build Laserfiche workflows using the workflow designer, this class is for you. So our agenda here today is to take a look at tracking failed workflows and or success workflows. We can set that up either way. And we can send notices by a workflow to notify yourselves of any of those issues. We'll also take a look at how we might create a custom HTML email to report statistics on successful or failed workflows over a certain period of time. And thirdly, we'll create a workflow to let you know how many documents were created this week. Again, using an HTML email format. So we're going to learn about how we do some custom email formatting that you might not have ever seen before. So within Laserfiche workflow, we can send ourselves notifications about workflows that are failing. And within the workflow designer or within the workflow administration console, we can actually configure notifications about terminating workflows. You actually don't have to build any special custom workflow to do this. We can actually build that into the system, and we'll show you how we can do that a couple of different ways. One is within the workflow design itself of any one workflow. When you're looking at the overall workflow design, down in the bottom right corner of the properties of that workflow, you'll see a configure termination notifications button like we see here. And that will allow you to view the termination emails and maybe even settings. If you go to the workflow administration console, you can also configure terminated workflow notification timers. And these can be set on any schedule you prefer. That will then allow you to configure a single or multiple email addresses that are going to receive this notification, and you can even limit the number of notifications or instances in each notification. All right. In addition, we will take a look at a second agenda item, that is creating a custom HTML email to report statistics on successful or failed workflows over a period of time. So we're going to do a little build along there and at least teach you how to do the design of that. So we'll be using the Laserfiche Workflow Designer. And what we'll be doing is we'll be adding a few activities Those include the workflow custom query activity, the for each row activity, the email activity, of course, and we're going to build tokens and HTML formatting within those tokens. And we'll teach about how to do that here in just a moment. So when we build custom HTML emails within workflows, at least in this example today, we're going to take a look at a few activities that you may or may not have seen. Workflow has some really great power, and what we'll learn about today is how to take a date and look at the previous and calculate a day prior, whether it be 6 days ago, 5 days ago, 10 days ago, weeks ago, whatever you need to do. We're going to use the date token calculator activity. We'll also use a set token or set token activity here that allows us to modify a value from a previous activity. So in fact, in the workflow, we'll take the date that's calculated from the date token calculator and modify it using the next activity, the token modification capability that's built into workflow. We'll also learn about how to build a custom query in order to find out the information from workflow about the status of workflows. And we'll show you about all that here. If you have access to your SQL database through Microsoft SQL Studio, that's always useful. However, it's not required. As long as you know the data sources and database names and columns, you should be able to build this custom query. And we're going to use some parameters in there as well. So you're going to learn some really neat stuff here today. We also will use the for each row activity because we are querying a database. We are going to be getting rows of data back, and there is an activity called for each row that will take each of that supplied information, each row, one at a time, and we're going to customize the content and add it to our token values. So that'll be another step that we're going to learn about here today. And then finally, we are going to configure the email, and that email will be formatted so that you can view it as a table. So within that email itself, we're going to take send an email. We're going to insert this token information, but what you end up seeing in the email is a list in a table, and you might even get hyperlinks to that information. All right. And then finally, our last item is to create a workflow to let us know how many documents were created this week. In this one, we will be doing a workflow search activity. We'll use the for each entry activity. We'll again use that email activity and our tokens that have been formatted with HTML formatting to create a table just like we had before. Slightly different email, but the format should be familiar if we've already done this step in the previous agenda item where we build our HTML and apply it into the email. We'll see how that works. So how do we build an HTML table for use in an email within a workflow? This is something that really will bump up the look and feel of your emails. And what we're going to be using is, as I mentioned, tokens. We're going to use the assign token activity, which are really just placeholders for either text or data, or in this case, HTML code. And they'll learn a little bit about that here today, so hopefully you're looking forward to that. Now we will create a token first. So there's this first token event where we create a token, and that's going to have the table's header information or the header HTML that we build out. And then we will allow this token to have additional rows added to it beneath the header row filled with data, so to speak. So we can create basically kind of a mini table or a mini database or a spreadsheet, if you will, with some columns and some rows using tokens and Laserfiche workflow. Now there's a second token that will be used to insert the rows, and that's a modification of the created workflow. So we're going to modify the existing workflow. Although the activity is a second token activity, we're going to modify an existing token, and we'll use the for each activity to add rows to the table. And this could be for each entry that we find in a search. It could be for each row for the data we find in a database lookup. There are many ways to use the for each activities, and there's several in there in workflow. We'll take a look at that here in a moment. So our first example will be documents created this week report. And the token is going to be composed of HTML for the table headers and labels for those 3 columns. Those columns, I've just picked them out of the air here, but the columns would be, for example, we want to learn about what was the creation date, the entry ID, and the name of the document. So those will be our 3 columns in our table here as far as our demonstration goes. Okay, so talking about the creation of that token to support the header, it's going to have the following values, and we use them to label the different columns. So the entire set of 3 columns are held within this TR HTML, the start TR, and that means the start of that table row. And then it also has an ending portion. So HTML always has a start marker and an ending marker. In this case, we can see in yellow, we have the start of the table row. Within that, we have, at least for this header row, we have a TH. It stands for start of header column. And then we put our text. So this will be creation date. That'll be at the top of the header. We won't see any of this HTML markup. We'll just see creation date. We'll see in blue, for example, the TH and then /TH surrounding entry ID. That'll be our second column, entry ID. And the third column would be the doc name column, in this case also surrounding by that starting TH and finishing with the /TH. All right, and so when we have that, we have built our first row, and that'll be part of the, and we'll show you this in the workflow here in a moment, exactly what it looks like. Now, so that first token will have that will look like this. So within that created token, we'll give the token a name, as we can see here. We are going to allow multiple values. So this token should allow multiple values because, one, it'll have that first row. That's always going to be the default, and you can see it's in here now. And then we will use the for each entry or the for each row to insert additional rows into this token, into this report token. Pretty fun stuff. The second token activity is going to have the found information. So again, we see that TR surrounding the entire row here. Now, TD here in this case is the data in the cell. And we're going to use a token that is coming from the information we are pulling back. So if the information is the creation date from that found entry, then great, for that particular one found entry. We're going to insert that date. We're going to insert the ID number, and we're going to insert the entry name. Now, we can also, you might see here, we've got this pound at encode URL at pound, which actually makes these items hyperlink clickable. For the entry ID, we probably really don't need that as a hyperlink, so we might want to take that out. Maybe we do want to create a link to the entry name or the document name and make it clickable as a web link URL. So this report could be static and just have no links, or like I'm suggesting here, we could make that list show us a list of documents and make those documents selectable. Click on it, and you can open up the document to view it from your email, and it would open up the link to the web browser and allow you to access the document through the web link or the web access portal. And we can use either web link or the web client to provide that link. It just depends on which one you want to use. So we're going to append all that information into the rows of that created token. So here's an example of the activity. It has the for each information being inserted, and notice that the towards the bottom left corner it says append to existing values. So you have the header row first, and then every time we find a row of information, this activity will add that with this HTML on the end and insert the next row and the next row until it's found all the rows that it needs to add into the table. All right, for example, here at CDI, we do that a bit more sophisticated than what I'm going to demonstrate here today. You can mark up and create as much HTML that you want. We do this when we send out client reports. I generated one here for our internal work, and this is kind of neat. It will generate lots of information in workflow, lay it out in the HTML email, and give you some columns and data in those columns. So really, we're just formatting the columns, inserting data in those columns within those tables. Pretty straightforward, I think, but obviously this is a more sophisticated view. We'll take a look at that. All right, so there we go. So our demo is coming up, and we'll review all those configurations as we go through this. So I'm going to switch gears here. We'll go ahead and bring up Laserfiche workflow. So now we're going to take a look at the workflow designer. And the first example was the first topic was how do we set up our termination notifications? If workflows are not doing its thing, or something's occurring within that workflow and we don't want to let it go too long, we want to be notified that it is terminating. Every workflow, when you build it, no matter what kind of workflow it is, down at the bottom right corner is a configure termination notifications item. Go ahead and click on that, and that brings up the dialog box where you can actually set the following email addresses to be notified. All right. And you can put in multiple, just put in a separator between the email addresses, email address, comma, email address, etc. All right. You can set the when to send, include the notification sent in the next notification sent by the terminated workflow email timer. We'll get to that in just a moment. Now, for the emails that are going in there, there is a box down here that says add the following prefix to the subject of notifications if you're doing inbox filtering. So this is kind of cool. You could build a rule that says, hey, if it's a workflow termination report, maybe you'll type in WF terminations and an underscore. And maybe that's going to be what your rule is saying, hey, if it subject is WF terminations underscore, throw it in my inbox, special box under my inbox to filter out. So some really neat functionality in there. If you are interested in more information, go ahead and click help. But it's really easy and basic to set up. Click OK, and that will be saved with your properties when you publish your workflow. The other place that workflow setting comes from, that's in the timer, is if you go to Tools, Workflow Administration Console, go ahead and make sure that's over here. We'll expand our server and go to the Server Configurations, Server Timers area. Okay. And under it's not in any other area, it's under server timers, and you can go, there should be a terminated workflow notification timer node here. It might not be enabled, but if you open it up by double clicking on it, you can set the schedule. You can exclude holidays, you can enable it or disable it whenever you want. And on the settings here, you can, as you'd seen previously, add any administrative email addresses that you'd like. Now, these email addresses can be used by the workflow itself, as well as other notifications. So if somebody's responsible for one workflow, maybe you want to email them, but then also include the administrators of the workflow system in general. Those might be different individuals, and you can put them in here. Again, a prefix for the subject of the email. You can limit the number of instances shown in each notification. It does give you a list. And then down below, we'll skip this select workflow to configure because basically that's the same as what we just saw previously. But below that is administrative options. Send emails to the administrative email addresses when it does not explicitly specify notification email addresses. So that would be there. And then diagnostic modes. For any workflows where there is somebody else set up, that actually will ignore whoever else is in there and just send the emails to the administrative email addressees. So that's an option available to you as well. And that's kind of a more global setting here under the terminated workflows notification timer settings, which we found under server timers within the server configuration node of the workflow administration console. All right, so that's really handy. The next area, we'll go back to our workflow. So that's how you can set up that termination notification. All right. The next subject was how do we send emails about documents that we've created this week. And we'll start with this one because the other one is the workflow for terminated workflows, which will kind of build upon what we learned here. So like I mentioned in the intro, this workflow is going to use a few functions, one of them being the date token calculator. That is in the list of activities. We'll scroll down, and it's towards the bottom, and it's one of the token creators, and it's called date token calculator. You can rename this activity, but within that activity, we can create different tokens. Now, we've only created one, and what we're trying to do is say, hey, let's look at the repository and report on documents created in the last 7 days or the last 5 days or whatever you want to do. So what we do is create a new token, and then we go ahead and configure it. As you can see, you can give the token a name, configure it with today's date. Usually it's custom date, which would be today's date. You can also set a specific date if you want to. There's different options here. Now, if you choose custom date, it will use, at least by default, it will use today's date. That %date, that means today's date will be inserted in here. Let's go ahead and take a look at how we've configured this one. Now, I've obviously mislabeled this a little bit because it says 7 days ago, but I changed my modify the date from above, which is today's date, and subtract 5 days. Really, it should be subtract 7 days. You also have the ability to click on these blue little links here, and you can change the logic. So we could do add, subtract. We could do days, months, weeks, years, hours, minutes, seconds, whatever you want to make a change to a date token. You can even do additional modification on top of that if you want to, but in this case, we're going to keep it simple and do that. All right. So we'll look. So what we're going to do is we want to run a search that goes back 7 days, and that's why we've done this and created a date that will be 7 days prior to today's date. So when this workflow runs, this is going to calculate a date 7 days prior to this date. Next up is our search. And in this case, I've used some syntax. We're going to look for any document, and it's kind of hard to read, I'm sure, but the LF:(name) equals and then asterisk within parentheses or within quotes means find any document. Type equals D, that means D for document. If it was a folder, it would be F for folder. And then the LF:(created) is a logical statement that says greater than or equal to, and then that date token calculator date of 7 days ago. So it's looking for anything greater than or equal to a date 7 days in the past. So that's your search query. You can even test it. You can even hit that today's date, or no, today's, not today, that would be, we'll do 8. We'll do just a date in there. Let's do the correct month and day. And there we go, we get a hit count there. So that's confirming that that's working. Now, one typically would have done that within the Laserfiche client to run a test to see that that is there. But I already knew that in advance, so that's why we get that result. Then what we do is we add that token or assign token values activity. You can tell by the icon. Now I've renamed this activity. It's really the assign token values activity. However, it has been renamed, and because the token does not yet exist, we're going to hit that create button and create the token itself. So let me remove that, and we'll take a look at what we've configured here. So basically what you do is you hit the create button, and in that pop-up that you get, you give a name to the token. I've called it report. You can call it table info. You can call it whatever you want. The important thing is to make sure that it allows multiple values because we are going to have a header row and data rows. So this builds our table. So this is going to start it out by adding that information. So you can see that we've got our TR for table row, TH for the header cells, and then the ending /TR within those greater than or less than symbols. So that's your first row of this table. And that's pretty much it. You don't have to add anything below that. Just make sure that you add your THs or your table header, HTML that starts and stops with whatever the text is. So you can change the text within there. There's no limit on what that is. Could be long, could be short, could have spaces, numbers, whatever you want to put in there. That's going to be the header names for those columns. And then go ahead and click OK. Now we did a search, and we're going to expect more than one item or document to come back from our search. So we are going to want to do a for each entry activity. Now, if we don't get anything, we might want to do nothing, right? So in fact, we've added a little conditional branch here that says, if the search result count is greater than 0, yes, run the table generation function and then send an email. Otherwise, as you can see, it's kind of hard to see here, but if no results are found, it basically skips this step and then just ends. So if this is a workflow that we set on a schedule to run every morning or every evening, then if there's nothing to send, it won't send it. If there is something to send, it will send an email. All right, the next step here is our for each entry, which is connected to our search repository activity. If you don't connect it to that search repository activity, well, workflow will 1, complain, and 2, you won't have any results to actually put into this table. Now in this case, so for each document coming back from the search, I've added a for each entry that is going to look up the current entry and retrieve its creation date. That's typically something that is in the entry, but I'm going to have to pull it out using this for each entry activity. All right, so we'll do that, and it'll be based on the current entry's entry ID. It could be on the anything that you really want to define based on that current entry, but it will be part of the for each entry activity, so you can actually see that in here. You would typically choose it from the for each entry current entry selection from the token selector there on the properties of that entry defined. To get additional properties, you can click in this blue box, and then in my case, we added the creation date value in there because we want to add that to our table. You can retrieve field values from a document if you are doing that as well. If it has template and field information, certainly you can grab that. It's not required. And in my example here, it really isn't, although this is set up to do that as well. Now the next step is generating web access URLs. So in order to make that document name clickable as a hyperlink, we need to set up some basic settings. And we've created a token. You can make it short, you can make it long, and we're going to connect it to the Laserfiche server. So if we take a look at that, we are going to give that token name. We can make it shorter, like WA, or just call it URL, whatever you want to call that. Now it should be pointing to the current entry of the for each entry. Okay, so it's going to generate a URL for that document in the language of the web, and basically we'll put the server name, the HTTP server name / Laserfiche, and then what you get as a link will be the hyperlink to the actual document name. It'll put basically puts in a doc ID value equals, and then it puts a link to the actual entry ID number, which is how the URL actually functions. So it generates the URL for us, but we just actually don't need that part of it. It'll just append everything else to it automatically. All right, so that's our web link or web access connection. This is a web access entry URL. You could create from the system. Laserfiche has the ability to create, as we can see here, web link URLs as well. So notice on the far left there, we've got Laserfiche web client URLs. But if this was for a read-only web link environment, you could create a URL for a web link environment. Okay, pretty cool stuff there. All right, now that we're getting those rows back in the for each entry, we want to append the rows to the existing token. So what we do is we actually click the modify button and create our token in that manner. So when you click modify, you have to go and find the activity that has that token, and then we append to the new values. So I'm going to cancel that, and we'll click and open this. So we can see we've got our previous activity up there at the top, set report HTML rows. The token is there in the list, and then we append the value to the item. So we need to have that table row TR beginning statement. We have our TD for each cell, and then for each output, we will insert that information in there. So that's a token. So if it weren't in there yet, you'd have to type in the TR information, TD, and then go search in your token and look for maybe the for each entry. You can do the creation date, which is that special information that we pulled, so you can throw that in there. As you can see, I actually kind of renamed it. It really is coming from the find entry activity, and we would put in that name there. Okay, so that fills that in really easily. So those tokens will fill in and then give you your table. Click OK, and you're almost done. Skip the track tokens. I like to see what I'm getting when I run my workflow to see the rows, and that way I can know if I'm getting data back. But in real workflows, we would probably either delete or disable that tracking. This is internal, by the way. It doesn't send any information. It's only internal to the workflow. Then we're going to build the email. So if this item is going to be emailed, well, we want to have an email sent to somebody, so we add the email activity. We always need a to, a subject, in this case, documents created this week, some boilerplate text, and then we're going to insert some tokens. And you can see the token here for that table. But if we go open up the email editor, it's a bit easier to see. And what we want to do is make sure we add the table style equals with a width and a border equals 1. So this information right here, this is important for putting lines around the data. So you've got a header row and then information below that with all the rows. So you get cells and for all this information in the table. And then there's also the HTML header, which it needs to be in there to create that as a HTML document in an HTML email. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click on this, and we'll select tokens to do one final configuration. And up there you can see the report information is coming across, but we need to make sure that for each item we will apply a value separated by space and apply formatting of HTML. This is a special code, so if it says HTML under apply formatting, it will format it as HTML. Other formatting could be for year and date and month for date fields, but in this case, for this entire information, we're going to use this special HTML formatting. All right, so then we click OK on that. You can see there's the report surrounded by and then our spacing with these pound signs. And then click OK. So with that in place, and then that table is ended by a slash table. So the table always has a beginning and end, and HTML around everything. So that makes our email generate that info. So we'll go ahead and save our workflow. We'll publish it. That's checking to make sure that everything's valid. Click OK. And then at this point, you can create a conditional or a scheduled start rule. In my case, for demo purposes, I'm just going to run this because I want to see what the results are. Now, unfortunately, my email server is not available at the moment, so I'm going to disable the email activity. But we do have the track tokens capability, and we'll go ahead and run our workflow. Now, I just made a change, and it says, oh, did you want to publish those changes? Yes, I do. You might have seen this before when you build workflows. And then we get our workflow results. We get a token, and we can see that it is generating the HTML in there. And if I was really clever, I could create a HTML page, but if you paste that in there, we'll go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. And here's an example. This is our cell, or our table, with our 3 columns. We've got our header and the information in there. If it was on an HTML page with actual functionality, these %20s are just spaces. So you would get hyperlinks here in this column. I just can't display that in an email because, like I said, my email server is not available at the moment, so I can't push an email through. But you get a cell that looks like this. If we just needed doc names, we could do it without the hyperlinks, and it would just be the name of the document would be listed in here for your results. All right, so that is your workflow to send a document with HTML. Your system, you'll connect your email to a email server. Your workflow system probably already has one configured. And if that is not, you can either point to it or select it if it's available. For example, clicking on the advanced item, well, let's go to the actual workflow. And if we take a look, the advanced settings allow us to choose an email server. And you could have multiple ones. You could manage different ones from here, from within the workflow, in order to send emails. All right. So, all right. And then the final activity is to send a list of terminated workflows that might be occurring during that week. And Laserfiche doesn't normally expose this. Now, we all know that in the workflow designer, you can run searches to show that in the first place. So for example, if we have the Laserfiche search workflow search, and if it's not available, you can click on view and add the search from your view options. And you can search for documents that are terminated, or sorry, not documents, but workflows that are terminated. You can even set a start date within a certain time frame, and let's say this week. And you can be more specific and say, oh, it's a particular workflow I'm interested in. But at this, with this setting, with a terminated workflows this week, you can hit search, and you should be able to get in your search results a list of workflows that had terminated. Well, what if you want this sent to you as an email? Well, we can do that. The way we do that is very similar to the way we did it for the previous example. We've got a date token calculator. We'll maybe look for the last 6 days, for example. Maybe we run it every Saturday morning, and we want everything from the previous week. We do need to format the date. It depends on the database. Now, we are going to query a database for that data. And the date time stamp is used typically by Laserfiche Workflow. So we need to change that date into a date times that the database recognizes. So in this case, I have a special configuration here in which we take the date, we reformat it to year-month-day, and then we add some minutes, hours, and seconds and subseconds into that format. So this is the date casting. We're casting the date as a particular format. And that's what the SQL database will be expecting when we run that custom workflow. And what are we connecting to? Well, Laserfiche actually has in its workflow database a view that basically shows us what we saw here. We just happen to query it using an interface, but the workflow can use that same view. And this is a custom workflow activity. We'll show you here down at the bottom. We have our query data, which is a more canned query, but we also have the custom query when we need to do some very unique queries that are not available out of the box using the query data option. And so we add our custom query, and here's what we've done in this case. If you know your columns that you want to get back, in this case, I just want to get back a little bit of information. I want to get the status. I want to get the workflow name. We could use end time, although I'm actually interested in start time as well. And then whatever triggered the workflow. I'm going to get some information back. And so we're going to select those columns. There is more in that view than just these 4 columns, but we want to get it back from a view, in this case, the workflow reporting log view. Okay, so that's the from statement. And you can just put a single space here. It doesn't have to be spaced out like this. Now, we're also going to customize this and do a little bit of special work here. We want to get back, in this case, I want to get back the terminated workflows. So I've added a where statement that says when or where the status value is 4. And I happen to know that 4 is terminated. Now, we also want to look for a value where the start time is greater than or equal to our week ago date. So we're looking for information from a week ago forward on terminated workflows. So if you remember, we had that step where we changed the date format. There's that date cast parameter, and we're using a parameter name. I put @ week ago and put that in here. Now it depends on what your database is. Sometimes you have to put this in quotes, sometimes you don't. Sometimes the date times is different. So depending on what you're looking at, it might be a little bit different, but most of the time it's going to work like this. So we're going to look where the start time is greater than or equal to our date, which is 7 days ago or 6 days ago, whatever that date is. So that's going to change no matter what, depending on when we run the workflow. So tomorrow, that date will be different than today. So that's pretty cool. We've got our custom query. And then we have, again, our creation of that first header row. Again, we've called it report. You can call it what you want. We do allow multiple values. We do create those header rows. And this time I've got our information in here. And I just want to make sure that that says start time. So we've got our workflow name, start time, and the person that started it. Click OK. And again, if we don't get any termination events, then why send the email? So we've got this conditional branch here that says if the results are found, and we've got our condition here where the custom query, if the results count, is greater than 0. Very similar to what we did with our result count from our search for documents. If we get anything greater than 0, it runs. If not, then nothing runs. Now, in this case, we have a for each row activity. And in fact, I'll point it out here in our workflow designer. Under the repeating topic on the activities here, you have for documents, if you do a search, the for each entry is typically used. If you're getting files that are being pulled back, we do for each file. Now, for database queries, we always use for each row. Now, this could be an Excel file that's giving you information or a SQL database. We would use the for each row. If you're pulling back a number of users, we could do it for each user. And if we're getting back multiple values from a multi-value field, we would use for each value. But in our case, we are querying a database, so we're going to use the for each row, and we're going to use the results of that query. So we have to connect the for each to the query results in order for this to work. And then within that for each row, we have our token. And again, this is a modify token. So you hit the modify, and then you will choose to use that same token. But the values are going to be different. We're going to be appending slightly different values in there. In this case, my token should be a bit more specific. And I called it end time, but it really is needs to be updated when we do that. In fact, you can even test your query, make sure that the date is correct. Need to type that in here. No, and I typed it in wrong. So if you do it right, it'll create the correct date, and then it'll update that query so that you can then insert the correct data from that query. I would point out, you notice under the for each row, it says end time. Now, I changed the query so that we are pulling back. Actually, I left it as end time. I really wanted it as start time. Click OK on that. So now it's doing that. And then if we go in here, we want to click on our item, scroll this over here, and theoretically, we should, from our for each row, notice it hasn't updated. So I need to run that query to get at least some result from that query so that it changes and updates the value from end time to start time, because I changed it in the query, but it doesn't update in the selector here until you run the query here in the workflow. Yes, kind of weird, kind of true. You might have seen that, but there you go. So I'll just leave that here for the time being. Click OK. And then in much the same way, we have our email. Create your to field, your subject line, and then change the text. Again, we want to add the table styling. So you could do just beginning table with that, but this one includes a style and border. It's useful to have that border. Again, we're going to customize that report with some HTML surrounds if we need to. If this is just a Now we're not using, you might notice that we're not using that generate web link URL or web client URL, because this one is just a list of items we want to have in here. We don't need to select anything. All right. So again, you could click on the email editor, make sure that you have that token. And if you click on that report, you just want to make sure that we have apply index separated by space, apply formatting, HTML. Click OK. And then you should be able to get an email. In my case, again, I don't have the email server that works. So we'll go ahead and publish that, save those changes, and then when you run the workflow, it will do its query. You can see it's stepping through that step. I'm going to hit F5 to refresh that screen, and then we would get our results back. And in that case, we might see something where the table in the email looks something like this. We can see that the workflow is named in there. The end time is incorrect. It should be the start time. That does come back with date stamps in there. And then our initiator column is in there as well. As you can see, I kind of done something silly from our previous example, but we can see that we've got our columns here from that query. All right. Okay. All right, so that was our demonstration of our workflow activities. We have different resources available. Some of these examples, especially the creating HTML email, is actually in the Laserfiche Solutions Exchange or Solution Exchange site. Just wanted to repeat that here. Support is found at laserfiche.com or just support.laserfiche.com. And our YouTube videos are available here as well. So enjoy those. Again, my name is Kyle Nebel at Cities Digital, and we thank you for your time. And at this point, we'll open it up to any questions. Go ahead and post any questions or put a question in the chat window, and we'll be happy to answer any of your questions. Awesome. Great to hear that you're finding some benefits here on this workflow tricks. So great. If you have any other questions, let me know. If you want to take anything offline, we can do any sessions as well. So thanks everyone for our attending our Laserfiche Consulting webinar here, and look forward to seeing you at the next one.